Hey y'all. Sorry for missing the last episode. Without getting into too many personal details, real life emergency came up the day I was literally going to record. Things are more stable, but what will go on in the long term, I don't really know. But I'm gonna try to keep up with these episodes as best I can. For the few people that are watching, and I appreciate that y'all are. I didn't have too many notes between these two episodes, so I'm hoping to do episodes 5 and 6 together. And on the train of audio updates, hopefully the audio will be much better from here on out, as a dear friend of mine has gifted me a new microphone. I did spend about 10 to 15 minutes actually getting my computer to properly use it as an input and not as an output, but I think I've got that fixed. If y'all can't tell, I'm not the most technologically astute of persons, which probably explains a lot about my setup and quality so far, so I thank you all for your patience. Also apologize that this is a slightly less aesthetic background than the painted wardrobe I'm normally in front of, but I can really only be there in the daytime, and I can't really set up my microphone in front of that, so y'all have to deal with the slightly less flattering angle of my room and the winter nighttime lighting, because I don't trust myself to film these during my lunch breaks anymore. But yeah, so with that, let's get into episodes 5 and 6. 6 and 7. It's been a week. Episodes 6 and 7 of Campaign 4 of Critical Role. It helps if I have my notes in the right order. So for the cold open of episode 6, we get a little bit of visual description of the elves that Valus grew up with, which does sort of confirm that, at least lore-wise here, I'm going to say there's probably not such a thing as dark elves in this world. While Valus aesthetically would be what those of us familiar with more traditional D&D settings or Exandria would consider a drow or a dark elf, we get descriptions of various colorful skin tones and hair color combinations, very floral description, which makes sense given their deity. And we do have a shot down of a theory I had briefly floated of Valus perhaps being even more closely connected to Salandri, seemed very interested in the mother-daughter relationship with Taisha and her daughter. But we do actually see Valus' biological mother, and she is not Salandri. So there goes my Valus is related to her goddess theory. So that one goes down the drain, but we do have a very fun juxtaposition of elf trance versus the wakefulness without rest of the undead. And I have a feeling we are going to get a lot of Brennan and Alex together harping on the visceral discomfort of Octus's situation, which as anyone who has sat through any of the Vampire the Masquerade actual plays that Alex has been a player on, or more recently a storyteller on, that tends to be a theme he loves bringing up in almost the transitions. So looking forward when we finally get to the Seekers table, getting a little bit more just immortality's not all it's cracked up to be when this is how you got here sort of descriptions. So we get in the kind of farewell scene with Olbid, we do get a drop on what the gnomish deity was the shaper of. That the gnomes had a goddess who was the goddess of magic, which brings us up to gnomes goddess of magic, humans god of the sun, elf goddess of nature, orcs the god of war, halflings the trickery goddess, and we got a reference in episode 5 of the dwarven goddess of the forge. That is 6 of the 7 shapers with their, like, I don't want to say pet species, but special race and particular domain. We do have sort of the most common of the D&D races sort of represented across those 6. And given that we have at least one humanoid animal, Nama, the beast folk, I wonder if there is a god of the beast folk, and if that's going to cover what we would consider Leonin, Tabaxi, maybe Aarakocra, Harengon. Like, we'll have to see if more humanoid animals show up. And if not them, are they outside of this dichotomy of having had a shaper assigned to them? We get fun little tidbits of the idea of magic items with an expiration date as a way of making magic items available to early level players without completely tipping the balance, which, as somebody who is entering into the field of DMing, I love it because magic items can invite such a creative role play, but they need to be balanced. And yet at the same time, some of the ways of balancing it make, like, the common magic items are fun and flavorful, and a creative person might be able to do something with some of them, but others are just sort of there. So I like this idea of, like, no, it does a little bit more, but the limitation is if you don't use it, it goes away. So I kind of like that, and I'll be keeping an ear out for other ways that Brennan does power balance his magic items. And then just sidebars, we found out about the sword that was particularly good against intangible enemies because he created it to give his daughter something to protect her from nightmares. God, I would have loved that sword as a kid. 100%, absolutely. I said in the last one of these videos that I relate very strongly to his daughters, at least his daughters as kids. Yeah, no, I would have wanted this sword, and I hope that they do find a pixie clan to send Olbid's way. Olbid deserves all the good things in the world, and does not deserve to be stolen from. I'm going to admit I had a very hard time with Tyranny taking that knife. There was a reason. I find it very difficult to roleplay characters outside of a good alignment. I don't like hurting people. Even in fantasy, I guess that's my power fantasy of I like to try to find the way to help the most innocent people. And for the record, this is not a slam on Whitney's choices. It's made very clear through the roleplay there is something else going on with her as a demon and possibly with her warlock pact. It was just, I was kind of hoping her interest in Olbid's wife and their bond was a little more on the wholesome side, and maybe a way of showing her, like, see, you're not so tied to your darker impulses. You do have this love and the care, and the way you're looking out for Wick, and the way you're interested in this couple's love. But looks like her story is gonna focus a little bit more on struggling against her instincts, or her word, archetype. And some of the things, when it did come out with the group and she was explaining, demons aren't necessarily evil, but there's certain archetypal energies that we play into. Given that the, flashback or the scene or the memory Brennan gave her talked about there to cause suffering, I don't think their archetypes necessarily line up with their names. Because to me, tyranny and causing suffering doesn't necessarily seem to. It'll be interesting to see how the archetypes and the names play into each other. As we've seen agony, cruelty, and enmity certainly display tendencies of either things they do or things that happen to them playing into their names, but whether that's an extra layer of, we already have our archetypes, and then we have these names, so we're already used to playing into archetypes, let's play into these as well, or whether there is supposed to be more of a connection. I don't feel like I've got enough information to make any kind of statements on that yet. But it will be interesting to see what Whitney and Brennan are setting up together for that, and that the knife became a magic item. I'm not sure if it became a pact item or if something else is going on there, but since Cadigan sent the hilt back but kept the blade, maybe we do find out sooner rather than later. We get the interesting tidbit in both episodes of the few times Robbie casts a spell besides a cantrip as Cadigan. He makes a point to bring up that Cadigan is clumsy and bad with his magic, is not practiced at it, and even the second episode, in episode 7, he references being very new to magic when he tries to cast Speak with Animals. So be very curious to see if, because especially if they are starting 3rd level, which is right around when you get your subclass, if the idea of this connection to Wulfric and this magic is new, if there was something that changed for Cadigan very recently that has pulled him out of being a pure martial into more of this mystical druidic connection, as rangers and druids have usually seen as very similar magic bases. But we make it to Hawthorne's Glade after a misunderstanding and almost combat, in which the most notable thing is we did get confirmed with Sam using Celestial Revelation that, mechanically speaking, he is playing an Aasimar. If he got there a little roundabout thanks to Grandma's wish. But we make it to Hawthorne's Glade. We learn a little bit more about how fairies and fae work here. I, as a bonus point, love the line Brennan just talked about. A lot of big emotions going on as somebody who I don't read a ton into fae lore, but I'm a kid that grew up with Peter Pan, the idea of fairies, of small fairies being only capable of feeling one emotion at a time, and they feel it to the extreme, which does sort of feel like how he was playing the other pixie, certainly, but that usually fae are depicted as creatures of emotion, heart, will, of life, which would set them as the opposite of undeath and the dead as they are here in the world of Ahriman. We get confirmation that Thimble was born in the Orchard and has never seen the Feywild. And again, we know the Orchard is a halfway point between Feywild and the world of mortals. But there is also reference to Hearth as another place fairies can be from that almost more physically ties them. So I want to say Hearth is most likely a place fully on the mortal realm that fairies can come from, as we do get confirmation that deep fire and dwarven fire specifically was mentioned, hurting fairies unless they are from Hearth. So whether Hearth is tied perhaps closely to dwarves or just more so to the mortal realm to sort of inoculate them, for better, or for lack of a better term, to mortality and things of the mortal world, ties them a little bit more to mundanities. We know cold iron, what hurt the gods can hurt fairies, but that Thimble is someone who spends more time in the mortal world and is from the Golden Orchard instead of from Feywild proper, is less susceptible to. And I also wonder if that's what's protecting her from when they first see all the injured and recuperating fairies. Brennan calls out that some of them have just been away from a place of fey magic for too long. We're starting to fade and starting to wither. But we know Thimble spent a lot of her time in Dol Machiar when she wasn't traveling with the Aussies. So is she better able to handle being in the mortal world and away from fairy magic because she's partially attuned to the mortal world? Or just was Thjazi considerate enough to always make sure they swung by someplace with enough fey magic, which isn't out of character for Thjazi based on how we've seen him interact with Thimble in flashback, so is entirely possible. And apologies if I've shifted the frame a bit. I'm trying to move a little closer to the microphone because the heater kicked on and it's very loud, and I don't know if this microphone picks that up. If it does, I apologize. The last thing I sort of picked up on in Hawthorne's Glade was when the hag showed the memory. I was under the impression this was a memory she had taken from Sid, because we know Sid was the one that had passed through there, while Casimir took the road. But it seemed to be a memory of Casimir's. Casimir talking about the betrayal, and making it very clear there was a resentment here. It was not just, I did what I have to do because I'm back to the wall, desperate. This is the only way to get the money I need to get these guys off my back and to finally get a better life. At some point, resentment towards the Aussie had set in, and we do see that even more with how he talks in the next episode. But I was a bit curious how the hag got that memory, because it didn't seem to line up with the timeline from what we knew happened with Sid and Casimir, for Sid to have been able to hear Casimir say this. Especially because we get confirmation in the next episode that for certain Sid and Kaz were not working together. I did for a moment wonder if this was trying to set up that Sid actually had been in on the betrayal, but it doesn't quite sound like that. Then we get our first real combat with the soldiers' table, where we can fully root for them to go and not go, oh my god, don't kill the fairies, this is a big misunderstanding. So we get a first look at Robbie's very interesting weapon, the Autolato thrower, which I did looked up a Google image search. I actually didn't look too much into the history of it, but I'm somebody that has trouble visualizing, so looking up, because we had it in the art, but I wanted to see diagrams of it in use to kind of get a better picture of what he was talking about. So it'd be very interesting to see how Robbie describes combat going forward using this weapon. And I frankly love that we are not just tied to the list of equipment in the player's handbook. Always love to see something interesting, particularly when it has a historical basis. And most of my notes are writing down confirmed either classes or subclasses. Now that we get, I have to eat my words from the last few episodes going, maybe Sam actually is playing a cleric or a weird kind of paladin. Nah. Okay. He triggered innate sorcery. We are definitely dealing with a sorcerer. Weirdly, the mechanics still seem to line up more with Clockwork Soul, because he read out the text in the next episode about the canceling disadvantage or advantage, and that is the Clockwork Soul ability. Now, it could be, from what I remember, the Clockwork Soul spell list, given that there isn't a Divine Soul Sorcerer yet in the 2024 rules. Because I believe Clockwork Soul gets lesser restorations and more protective spells, that led into more what Sam was looking for. We have noticed he has not cast, at the very least, any damage-dealing spells, whether or not he lacks them entirely or whether he is simply just refusing to cast them. Remains to be seen. Possibly in the next episode. So it does look like, at least mechanically, we are running with a Clockwork Soul Sorcerer for Wickander. And we have Thimble triggering Fancy Footwork, which is she makes her attack and then gets away without an opportunity attack, so we are definitely dealing with a Swashbuckler rogue, which I love. My short-lived rogue that I got to play was a Swashbuckler. I loved the archetype, love the subclass, can't wait to see it more in play. Any lingering doubts that Robbie was not a Beastmaster, but just had a wolf and was some other subclass, based on how he was commanding Wolfric in battle, we've got a Beastmaster rogue. And based on Tyranny getting temp HP when some of their foes went down, we are dealing with a Devil, Demon, Fiend Pack Warlock. And I wrote down Teor's Oath of Glory. I believe we saw his particular, it was his channel divinity, I believe. And again, this is taking my notes after having watched this last week. I believe this is the Inspiring Smite, where he gives out temp HP on a smite. Whatever it is the Oath of Glory channel divinity was triggered. Which is kind of interestingly fitting. I believe Leonin and the original Oath of Glory for the 2014 version, I believe they were both in the Mythic Odyssey of Theros book. It's not a book I'm super familiar with, but I do believe that was the same source book for both of them. So that might be what is inspiring some thoughts for Teor. And interesting, the Oath of Glory tends to focus on feats of physical prowess. At least that's mechanically what it is set up to kind of be about. So it'll be interesting to see how the mechanics is going to influence the roleplay going on, and what being a paladin is really going to mean to Taor when we're digging into that. And then my last note for the episode is a very fun moment with the dice absolutely being on Wick's side, and that attack that could have killed him in one shot completely missing him. I just had to laugh because I'd just come back from D&D in a castle, and one of the one-shots I got to play there was Home Alone in D&D Kobold Edition, basically, where a bunch of kobolds were setting up traps to whittle down an army before they got to the dragon's cave where they set up the final battle. And one of my friends was playing a sorcerer. We were level 2. It was Boom the Sorcerer. He believed he was magic incarnate and impossible to hurt. Never took a hit during that entire one-shot, including when the big boss ogre swung her club at them, and thanks to shield, did not connect. So Boom the Sorcerer managed to end this entire one-shot still believing he was invincible, and just that moment with Wick was a very, like, I am magic incarnate moment. Which is very fun to see, since I watched this episode right after I came back from D&D in a castle. I'm like, oh, it's that whole beat again. Yeah, so those are the notes I have on episode 6. So I'm going to move into episode 7, and yeah, it does look like I can get to both of these in the same video. So we have the cold open that was cutting between the museum and the Pentevral. Pentevral, we're not getting too many lore things, except, okay, this is our 5th Dean of the Pentevral. She hasn't quite said yet what she intends to do about it. I don't trust that scholarship she announced. But on the museum side of it, surprise, surprise, the benefactor of the museum is still alive. I was convinced that guy was dead. I don't know, there's just vibes the Cormorant lady was giving off in the last interaction was, and I think there was a missed insight check where I'm like, I think this NPC is not coming back, but he's here. So I don't know if I'm happy to be wrong yet or not. I mean, if he's mostly harmless, I guess I'm glad. We do get a name for the pariah blade that killed the god of war. It was Shay's blade, so I'm assuming Shay is the hero that struck the final blow. Which makes me wonder about the liar's blade, but then again, if you're the sort of person that wields the liar's blade, I guess you're the sort of person that your real name wouldn't get attached to it. We'll see if we learn a little bit more about them. And Cormorant asking questions about whether the pariah blades could only kill gods or if they were capable of harming celestials as well. Now, given that the schemers are planning to set the Sundered Houses against each other, I think this is a very interesting line of questioning for House Cormorant to be pursuing, given that as far as we know, nobody actually knows about Grandpa Halavar down in the basement, but if anyone is going to be in a position to get their hands on some filament, poke around with it, and figure out what it might be, it would be a magically inclined other sorcerer's house. So House Taconis, House Cormorant, if they're as suspicious of Halavar as Halavar is suspicious of them, maybe they're figuring stuff out and want an insurance policy. Which could explain why they were so suddenly very interested in accounting for all of the pariah's blades, which also makes me hope that Thiazi's liar blade was definitely one of the things that he got Bolaire to give him from the collection, now that I think of it. Which definitely makes sense why the Halavar family was not happy that Wick gave it back to the Fang family. So that'd be interesting. So we rejoin the soldiers at the base of the Wraith Tree. We don't get too much lore. We get a little world building about Love to the Line when discussing kind of the terrible choice that the fairies had to make. Was that the choice was made, like, while some blame still had to be laid at the fairies' feet, that choice was made necessary by men like the poacher they found that was the one that had cut off Subri's horns. and was very clearly harvesting organic elements from magical creatures to power potions. And again, for anyone who is a Worlds Beyond the Number listener, yeah, that's Brenda's bringing that back. I cannot believe I am blanking on the name of the place that was doing that. Wasn't the Citadel? I mean, the Citadel a little bit. It was the Guild Mages headquarters in the city with all the gargoyles, where they found ghosts strapped to the chair and being drained of her blood that could be used as the dispelling agent. And that giraffe spirit also being cut into for undetermined experimentation. Yeah, Brennan, let's, quick point to the bad guys. They're cutting up something sacred and magical to turn it into a potion. Yep, we've found some of the more negative elements of the world again. Thank you, Brennan. And we get confirmation, for those that didn't watch the cooldown, that the Wraith was in fact a priest of Tansul. We get more scenes of the Candescent Creed kind of pushing out folk traditions with the ropes around the one fairy tree being cut down. Interestingly enough, we see in the interaction with that acolyte in the chapel that demons are not universally welcomed by the Creed. It has not been spread far and wide, the message of, hey, look, the Creed has even been able to save these demons, which seemed to be the story that they were pushing in Dolmakyar, at least. So it is a bit interesting that they're not using that, but maybe they use that in more cosmopolitan areas that are more mixed to try to make the message more appealing, versus in the more simpler areas, to use Cadigan's word for it, they just don't bother. And then we get the tidbit about the widowed Baroness of Sloke remarrying recently to a member of the Sundered House, and it seemed in that moment that the cast thought that that was Casimir, but the timing of that didn't work out, so we get confirmation later. No, she married a cousin of the Taconis family, didn't survive long after that, and then the cousin bequeathed the barony to Casimir. So we get that little chain of what Casimir got and how. We learn a little bit more about the War of the Axe and Vine, which, as a reminder, we have not seen flashbacks to this war, but this was the war that Thiazi was a war hero of, that allowed him to marry Aranessa before the Falconers' Rebellion, which was more sort of a fall from grace for Thiazi. Well, at least in the eyes of the nobility. In the eyes of the people, it wasn't so much a fall from grace. And we get confirmation of what the War of the Axe and Vine was, and that was actually sort of an aggregate war of a lot of different conflicts, including a revolution for the freedom of, and the founding of Timony, the kingdom. We learn of Timony as a kingdom quite entwined with Druidism, specifically as it relates to dogs. So, yeah, bit of a dismal place in terms of growing land, but gotta love that they like their dogs. And that Druid, and Brennan set up, he mentioned that Druids were welcomed into the court of the king as a part of its founding through being able to talk to dogs. And so later when we meet Dame Morgane, and referencing her companion Hawkins, so very interestingly, we have like Dame and Sir are sort of these knightly terms. In a lot of traditional fantasy settings, you would see druids as sort of eschewing the courtly, knightly politics, but it's very interesting to see a country where they are more interwoven, which is very fun there. We do see there are more people with the Candescent Creed filament tattoos. This is not just limited to the family, but if you're high enough up in the order, you seem to be eligible for these. We do see the Candescent Creed in sort of inciting a rebellion. It'd be interesting for me to see whether this is a power play from the Candescent Creed to oust the king and take power, or whether this is someone who genuinely believes the teachings of the light and therefore sees the king as a tyrant, and whether that's catching on sort of an unintended consequence that the Creed could still capitalize on. I could see this being either way of just sometimes it's as dangerous to have genuine belief in something like this creed as it is to be able to misuse it for anything, and sort of maybe showing Wikander a couple of different dangerous paths he could walk down. As again, definitely the acolyte in the chapel was a true and full believer, and Wick saw his reaction to both tyranny and Thimble. So sort of the eyes opening of maybe there are some good things here in the creed, but because of how it was written and what it was meant to do, does maybe Wikander take it upon himself to rewrite parts of the creed, sort of codify what he believes in. Be interesting to see where and how he goes from here. And we reach Sloke, and we have the minor consolation that at the very least Casimir was given a very shitty castle in a very shitty part of the world. And unfortunately, like they said, you put the world's biggest asshole in charge of one of the worst places. It's you didn't make it any better for the people there, as we see with this. Oh, drag everybody out of their houses and double their taxes. Great, he's gonna make a bad situation worse. Well, although maybe not for long, given where the episode ended. So we had notes that the Taconis caravan that was seen in Sloke was traveling for speed. We realized later this was just, they wanted to get this here's the deed you didn't hold on to, and we gotta go deal with whatever we're dealing with. Which seems to have something to do with Sid, and with Sid not being Kaz's concern with information that has come to them. We don't know a lot about Sid to know why Sid is of interest to the Taconises. So whether it's something about Sid, or whether they know that Sid is being tracked by these people, that there's a fairy, we don't know enough about what the wider Taconis plan is to know why Sid is of interest to them. But I'm a little afraid and very intrigued to find out. I did also find it interesting that I believe Brennan described there being almost a light or a glow in the Taconis knight's mouth. Again, if Filament is starting to get into the hands of other sundered houses, are the Halavar's secrets getting out? And are they finding other uses? Or is this something else? Some other sort of glowing magic? And we do get an interesting reaction from the Taconis cousins upon learning that Thiazi saw a falcon, which is also a confirmation of what it was Thiazi saw that made him believe he was dying. And Cass chalks it up to almost this superstition, he really believed in the thing of the falcons. And the Taconises absolutely took this seriously, that Thiazi saw a falcon when he was dying. Interestingly, in the overture, when Cadigan saw a falcon, Brennan went into great detail about the layout of Dol and how Cadigan, as somebody who understands nature, wouldn't be surprised that a falcon was there. But the Taconis, so there's something going on with falcons that some people are aware of, but other people aren't. And Cadigan was somebody who was not around Dol a lot. I'm almost wondering, it couldn't have been that, there was a blatant killing off of falcons around Dol because then Cass would know it was unusual to see a falcon. So I'm very curious to see what is going on with that. And then my last note as we end the episode is that we pick up that Cass is several days sleep deprived and on the knife's edge of sanity, which is never a great place for a villain to be. I'm sure next episode is going to be interesting. I apologize for wrapping up, but I did see I got a text and do have an unfolding personal situation, so I do have to check that. But yes, that is the end of these 2 episodes. I do believe, given that this is Thanksgiving for us here in the States, we should be getting a week off. So hopefully things will calm down enough that I will know if I can get back to regular filming going forward. But thank you all for your patience, and yeah, I appreciate y'all. Okay. Bye, y'all.